Welcome back. You impossible things. You beautiful anomalies who were never meant to make it through what you survived. The ones they quietly wrote off, the ones they assumed would fold, fade, or fracture under the weight. And yet here you are, still breathing, still thinking, still standing in a version of yourself they no longer recognize. You don't look like someone who survived collapse. You don't sound like someone who was nearly erased. And that's the part that unsettles them most. Because you were supposed to break loudly. You were supposed to fall apart in ways that made sense to them. You were supposed to become smaller, easier, quieter, grateful just to exist. But instead, you did something far more disruptive. You went inward. While everyone else was watching the surface, you disappeared into the depths. While they expected noise, you chose silence. While they waited for explanation, you stopped explaining. And in that quiet, something irreversible happened. You didn't gain anything. You shed what was never yours. See, people misunderstand what actually happens when someone survives deep psychological pressure. They think the damage is what defines you. They think trauma leaves you fragile, reactive, dependent. But there's another outcome they rarely talk about. Sometimes pressure doesn't shatter a person. Sometimes it burns away the false structure. Sometimes everything collapses for a reason. Because before the collapse, you were carrying beliefs that weren't yours. Expectations you didn't choose, rules you never agreed to but followed anyway, because everyone said you had to. You believed certain doors were closed, certain paths weren't for you, certain limits were fixed and final. And then life did what it does best. It removed everything you were using to cope. The approval, the distractions, the identities that kept you safe but small. And suddenly you were alone with yourself. No audience, no script, no one telling you who to be next. That's where the real shift began. Not in a moment of triumph, not in some dramatic breakthrough, but in the quiet realization that nothing was coming to save you, and nothing needed to. You started noticing things then, how many of the rules you lived by were never enforced. Only assumed. How many fears existed only because you'd been taught to respect them. How much energy you spent managing perceptions instead of listening to yourself. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something unlocked. Not a thing, not a power, a state, a calm recognition that you no longer needed permission to exist as you are. That was the moment the internal lock loosened. You didn't announce it. You didn't celebrate it. You probably didn't even trust it at first. You just noticed that the old buttons didn't work anymore. Guilt stopped landing the way it used to. Shame lost its grip. Fear still visited, but it no longer ruled. And people around you felt that shift before they understood it. They sensed it in the way you stopped, over-explaining, in how you paused before responding. Instead of reacting, in how you didn't rush to prove, defend, or perform. You became unpredictable. Not chaotic, not reckless. Unclassifiable. And systems, social, emotional, psychological, hate what they can't predict. They rely on patterns, on triggers, on rehearsed responses. You removed yourself from that equation. You stopped reaching for validation that never satisfied you anyway. You stopped shrinking to preserve comfort that was costing you your self-respect. You stopped mistaking endurance for obligation. And that's when others began to feel unsettled. Because your silence wasn't empty anymore. It was deliberate. Your calm wasn't passive. It was anchored. Your distance wasn't avoidance. It was discernment. They tried to interpret it through old frameworks. Maybe you're cold now. Maybe you changed too much. Maybe something broke. But nothing broke. Something aligned. What you discovered in the aftermath wasn't a secret handed down from anywhere outside you. It was something far more uncomfortable and far more powerful. You realized most of the locks in your life were internal, beliefs installed early, limits repeated often enough to feel true, stories reinforced by people who needed you to stay in your place so they could remain comfortable in theirs. And once you saw that, you couldn't unsee it. You noticed how often fear was disguised as responsibility, how control wore the mask of care, how obedience was praised as maturity. You began choosing differently, not loudly, not rebelliously, quietly. You stopped explaining your boundaries to people committed to misunderstanding them. You stopped offering access to those who treated your presence as disposable. You stopped chasing outcomes that required you to betray yourself. And doors started opening, not because the world changed, but because you did. Opportunities you never saw before became visible. Conversations shifted. Rooms that once felt intimidating suddenly felt small, not because you became superior, but because you became internally aligned. And that kind of alignment is destabilizing to anyone still living by borrowed rules. They may not say it out loud, but they feel it. Your presence now acts like a mirror, not a flattering one, an honest one. Some people lean in when they see themselves clearly. Others recoil. That's not your responsibility. Awakening isn't a performance, it's a process of subtraction. You didn't add confidence, you removed fear. You didn't gain authority, you stopped outsourcing it. You didn't become powerful. You stopped pretending you weren't. And yes, there's a cost. Loneliness visits when you no longer speak the old language fluently. Isolation creeps in when you outgrow spaces faster than new ones form. There are moments when you wonder if it would be easier to go back. But you can't, not because you're stubborn, because the lock is gone. You've seen too much, felt too deeply, understood too clearly. You know now that most walls were never solid. They were maintained by belief, reinforced by repetition, and guarded by fear of exclusion. And you stepped through anyway, not with force, with awareness. You didn't burn bridges, you simply stopped crossing them. You didn't wage war. You withdrew your energy from battles that were never meant to be won, only to keep you occupied. And now you stand in this unfamiliar space, not fully comfortable, not fully certain, but undeniably awake, still integrating, still unfolding, still walking forward without a map because the old one no longer applies. Others may still be trying to understand what happened to you. They may replay old versions of you in their minds, searching for the moment you changed. But the truth is simpler than that. You didn't change all at once, you remembered. Slowly, painfully, honestly. Who you were before you learned to doubt yourself. And that remembering isn't finished yet. Because this state you're in now, this quiet sovereignty, this calm refusal to shrink, it's not the destination. It's the threshold. And you haven't even stepped fully through it yet, because what comes after remembering is responsibility. Not the heavy kind people warn you about. Not duty or sacrifice or saving anyone else. The responsibility of self-governance. See, before, you could blame the world. You could blame circumstances, timing, other people's control, their rules, their limits, and some of that blame was justified. But now you see too clearly. You see how often you handed your power away just to feel safe, how often you accepted half-truths because the full truth felt too disruptive, how often you chose belonging over alignment. And once you see that, you can't unknow it. That's why this phase feels heavier than the collapse ever did. Because collapse happened to you. This happens because of you. Because now, every choice is yours. You don't get to hide behind confusion anymore. You don't get to pretend you didn't notice the red flags. You don't get to say, I didn't know better. You do know better. And that knowing changes everything. You start moving slower, not because you're afraid, but because you're precise. You listen more, but you tolerate less. You feel deeply, but you don't drown in it. Your nervous system learns a new language. One that isn't built on urgency or panic or proving yourself. You don't rush to fill silence anymore. You let it speak. You don't chase clarity. You wait for alignment, and this is where people get confused, because they mistake your restraint for hesitation, your calm for detachment, your boundaries for distance. They don't understand that you're not withdrawing from life. You're choosing it consciously for the first time. You notice how different interactions feel now. Some conversations energize you instantly. Others drain you before they even begin. Some people recognize you without explanation. Others feel threatened without knowing why. You don't argue with either reaction, you observe. You've learned that observation is power when it's paired with self-trust. That's the thing no one prepared you for. Awareness doesn't make life easier. It makes it honest. You see patterns everywhere now, not in a paranoid way, in a grounded, almost quiet way. You see how control operates through expectation, how manipulation hides inside concern, how obligation disguises itself as loyalty. And instead of reacting, you pause. That pause changes outcomes more than any confrontation ever could. Because when you stop reacting, systems lose leverage. People who relied on your predictability don't know how to engage anymore. They test boundaries, not aggressively, but subtly. They push lightly, just to see if you'll fold. You don't, not dramatically, not angrily. You simply don't move. And that stillness is louder than any explanation. You're not trying to teach anyone a lesson. You're not proving a point. You are honoring a line you can no longer cross without betraying yourself. That's the real transformation, not awakening, not empowerment, self-respect without negotiation. It changes how you love. It changes how you work. It changes how you show up. You no longer confuse intensity with intimacy. You no longer confuse history with obligation. You no longer confuse effort with worth. And yes, there are moments when you miss the old version of you, the one who tried harder, the one who bent more, the one who believed if they just explained themselves better, things would work out. But that version of you was tired, brilliant, yes, capable, absolutely, but exhausted from carrying weight that was never meant to be yours. You didn't abandon them, you relieved them. And sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet, you feel the echo of who you used to be, not as regret, as gratitude, because they got you here. They survived long enough for you to choose differently. And now comes the part no one romanticizes. Integration, the slow process of living from this new place without turning it into an identity or a performance. You're not here to convince anyone. You're not here to be followed or admired or feared. You're here to be consistent, to let your actions match your inner alignment over time. That's what really unnerves people. Anyon can change loudly for a month. Anyon can reinvent themselves publicly, but quiet consistency. That forces others to confront whether they're actually growing or just talking about it. You don't announce your standards, you live them. You don't threaten distance. You choose it when necessary. You don't demand respect. You embody it and let the rest sort itself out. Some relationships fall away naturally, not with drama, with silence. Some opportunities no longer appeal to you, even if they look impressive on paper. You feel it immediately when something costs too much of yourself. You walk away without needing to justify it. And that's when you realize something subtle but profound. Freedom isn't loud. It's spacious. It feels like breathing fully for the first time without checking if anyone's watching. You don't need to escape the world. You don't need to dismantle anything. You simply stop internalizing rules that were never aligned with you. And as you do, your presence changes rooms, not because you dominate them, because you're no longer negotiating your worth. People feel that. Some are drawn to it because they're ready. Others resist it because it exposes how much of themselves they've postponed. You don't take either, personally. That's another shift. You no longer need to be understood by everyone. You'd rather be understood by yourself. This path isn't glamorous. It's quiet mornings where you check in with your body before your phone. It's making decisions that feel right even when they don't look impressive. It's choosing long-term alignment over short-term relief. And yes, sometimes it's lonely, but it's a clean loneliness, not the kind that comes from abandonment, the kind that comes from standing in truth while others are still negotiating theirs. And slowly, very slowly, you begin to notice something else. The loneliness doesn't stay. It shifts. It makes room. Because when you stop tolerating what drains you, you create space for what meets you. Not everyone will come with you. They're not supposed to, but the ones who do. They recognize you instantly. There's no convincing, no explaining. Just a quiet mutual understanding. You don't bond over wounds anymore. You bond over clarity. You don't connect through chaos. You connect through presence. And that's how you know this isn't a phase. It's a recalibration. A return not to who you were before everything fell apart, but to who you were beneath everything that was added to you. You're still learning how to live from this place. You're still adjusting some days. You slip back into old habits. Some days you doubt yourself. That's normal. Awareness doesn't make you immune to being human. It makes you responsible for how you respond, and you're responding differently now, with patience, with discernment, with a kind of grounded confidence that doesn't need witnesses. You don't need to rush what's unfolding. This isn't about arrival, it's about continuation. Because the threshold you stepped onto wasn't an ending, it was an opening, and what lies beyond it isn't something you conquer. It's something you live, one deliberate choice at a time. You're still standing not because you're invincible, because you finally stopped abandoning yourself. And this is only the beginning of what that makes possible.